A loan like this is called an amortizing loan. You make the same payment, which includes both principal and interest, over every period. And what happens is, each period, you pay down a little bit more of the principal. So your interest is a little bit less, and your principal is a little bit more. So over time, the principal amount decreases, and therefore the interest that you're paying each month is also going to decrease. So in that same payment, because you're making the same mortgage payment, the same car loan payment every period, while each payment is the same, the part of that payment that is interest decreases, and the part of that payment that is principal increases. Well, one is production opportunities. What's out there? What's available? What can you invest in, and what are the returns from that investment? Economic conditions, recession, expansionary time, boom times. What are interest rates like right now at this particular time? And is it a good time for expansion? Is it a time when companies are retrenching and saying, hey, we really can't do so much? What's going on in the economy? Time preferences for consumption. Are people spending a lot or saving a lot? Risk. What's the default risk for a company? Is it a particularly risky environment? Is the risk of bankruptcy high for this particular project or this particular company? And inflation. What do you think inflation is going to be, and how do you think that's going to impact the economy? Let's first look at some of the assumptions that go into this. In economics, we assume that people prefer more to less. Now, that's pretty true when we're talking about money. Given a choice of more money or less money, I think most people would choose more money. It is not true about everything. If you've just had a 5-course meal, you probably don't want to eat any more right now. But for money, we do make the assumption that people want more. Let's look at a very simple 2-period example. There are only 2 periods, today and tomorrow. And let's say that that middle dot represents what you're going to get today. Draw that line down, that's the income today. Draw the line to the side, that's the income next year. Now, if you're happy with that, great, you're done. You don't have to do any more. But what if you're not happy with that? What if you either want to spend more money than you're getting today at the price of having less to spend next year? Or what if you don't need to spend so much this year at the advantage of having more to spend next year? That upper left dot represents a saver or an investor. That person is willing to spend less today and have the benefit of having more next period. The lower right-hand dot is the borrower. The borrower wants to spend more money today at the price of having less to spend next period. And there's no right or wrong about this. It's not that savers are good or borrowers are bad or vice versa. It's just that people have different consumption preferences. Some people want to consume more today. Other people want to save and consume more in the future. Well, the good thing about interest rates is that they bring the borrowers and the savers together. If I have more money that I want to spend this period, I can invest it or save it, earn interest on it. Meanwhile, the borrower can take that money that I've saved, pay interest on it, and both of us are happier because of the existence of capital markets and the fact that people can borrow or lend. At the margin, the current interest rate just compensates the most reluctant saver for deferring consumption. Bad news, or even just more uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future, can cause interest rates to rise. Now, some of these consumption preferences are roughly related to age. Typically, if you're younger, you're more willing to exchange time for money. You'll save money by doing it yourself. And typically, not always, but typically when you're older, you're more willing to exchange money for time. I Don't want to mow the lawn, I don't want to clean, I'll pay somebody to do those rather than doing it myself. Now, household savings rates. The U.S., I am sad to say, has one of the worst rates of saving compared to other countries. There's the U.S., maybe not quite at the bottom, but pretty darn close to being at the bottom. We only have a couple of countries, Finland, New Zealand, and Australia, where the people are worse savers than U.S. citizens, with, interestingly, some European countries, Italy, Belgium, and France, at the high end of saving the most. Savings rates vary across countries and across time. Again, as I said, Italy had the highest rate and pretty much has remained the thriftiest country. The Asian countries also tend to be very thrifty countries. More people are willing to save in those countries. In the U.S., not only are the savings rates way lower than in other countries, in some years they've been negative. For example, savings was negative in 2001. There was dis-saving in 2001. There was also dis-saving in 2005 as well. And let's look at what might have caused, first, the decline in savings. This is a little bit old, but the numbers still apply, 1992 to 2002. Savings rates in the U.S. went down considerably in that 10-year period. Well, think about what was happening in the 90s. Stock market was doing great. Economy was booming. People had jobs. They were making money. They said, I don't need to save for retirement. I've got all this stock investments that's making more and more money, growing and growing. My stock investments are going to be my retirement. I can spend on all those things I wanted to spend. Let's look at 2005. 2005 was at the peak of the housing boom. Housing prices were going up and up and up and didn't crash until starting a little bit in 2007 and definitely in 2008 and 2009. So people said the same thing. Look, my house is going up in value. Look at all this equity that I have in my house. I don't need to save money. All I need to do is sell my house and I'll have plenty of money. So certainly the economic conditions influence savings rates. In downtimes, people do tend to save more because they realize their investments aren't doing so well. There are several explanations for the kind of strange mix of robust economic health and seeming extravagance of U.S. citizens. Again, the prosperity of the 90s and the early 2000s reduced the need for people to save as much out of their income. Rising value of their investments, rising value of their homes made it possible to finance a standard of living in retirement with less foregone consumption today. Also in the U.S., in the 90s in particular, we had record inflows of foreign capital that also supported the investment programs of U.S. corporations. They didn't need U.S. citizen money. They had plenty of foreign capital coming in. The U.S. government also switched from budget deficits to surpluses during the 1990s. Now, these are all partial explanations. They don't really explain why U.S. savings rates are so low, particularly compared to other countries, or why we had so few consequences of that decline in savings. Some problems, the assumptions that are in the statistics aren't so great. These statistics assume you pay cash for a car. Well, most people don't do that. They assume that a mortgage is all spending. Well, that's not true either. Part of that mortgage payment is return of principal. It's not spending, only the interest part is spending. And you're building up equity in your home in that time period. So again, hard to fully explain the low U.S. savings rates, but nonetheless, they are there, and they haven't had a huge impact because of foreign capital. Also, the U.S. economy is much more based on quality innovations, human capital, rather than a manufacturing economy. In today's economy, education and innovation are really the main engines of wealth-producing growth, not physical capital. But the official statistics count spending on education and spending on research and development as consumption, not investment. And you're really making an investment in education, or a company is making an investment in R&D that's going to pay off in the future. For example, if a U.S. company buys new capital equipment, that bolsters the U.S. savings rate. But if those same companies hire more scientists and boost R&D, their spending would not be counted as investment, nor would it add to savings, even though it would be good for long-term growth. Same thing on an individual basis. Your parents decide to spend $30,000 to build a new media room versus $30,000 on your education. The media room is savings. The second on your education is spending. So savings rates don't include capital gains. Home equity is not included. There are some problems with some of the statistics, but even after you make those adjustments, we're still saving less. Let's look at purchasing power. There is a real rate of interest, what the rate is without any inflation adjustment, and a nominal rate of interest, what the interest rate would be if you include inflation expectations. Now, when you look at interest rates quoted in the paper, they are going to be nominal rates whenever you see any sort of interest rate in the business press. The real rate typically is in the neighborhood of 2 to 4%. It does change because of economic conditions. The real interest rate is the interest rate that you would pay if there were no inflation and no risk. So the interest rate on a risk-free security. Now, if we want to get the real rate, the approximation formula is that it's the nominal rate minus the inflation rate. To get a more accurate real rate, which is more important if you've got high interest rates, the nominal rate minus the inflation rate divided by 1 plus the inflation rate. That real rate of interest tells you changes in purchasing power. The nominal rate of interest is the quoted rate of interest. That's the changes in actual number of dollars. So again, do understand when you see an interest rate, what you're going to see is the nominal interest rate. And that nominal interest rate is the real rate plus other factors, the main one of which is inflation. Now here are U.S. interest rates and inflation. The nominal rate, the rate with inflation and inflation, and you can see it tracks pretty well. The nominal rate mostly is higher than the inflation rate. And the nominal rate goes up when inflation goes up, the nominal rate goes down, roughly, again, not one-to-one correspondence, when the inflation rate goes down. From time value of money properties, if you have an increase in an interest rate, it's going to decrease the NPV of a particular investment. So what happens is, if we have higher interest rates in general, that makes the positive net present value investments that are available even lower. So knowing what that interest rate is very important to companies. Can they borrow money cheaply? Is equity costly or is equity cheap? That's going to make a difference in what projects are going to be positive versus what projects are going to be negative. The yield curve, which also is referred to as the term structure of interest rates, is a picture of the relationship between interest rates and time. The term structure says that depending on what the time period is, we're going to have higher or lower interest rates. Almost always we have an upward sloping yield curve. Long-term interest rates are higher than short-term interest rates. And that makes sense. Long-term is riskier. We don't know for sure what's going to happen in the future. We have a tough time predicting the near future, much less the far future. So here's a picture of several points in time. We have an upward sloping yield curve in 2008, somewhat upward sloping, steeply upward sloping in 2008, normal or typical in 2007, and flat or potentially inverted in 2006. The picture of the yield curve tells you something about what future expectations are. Almost all of the time, the yield curve is upward sloping. Again, that makes sense. It's riskier in the future. Far future, you expect a higher interest rate to compensate you for more risk. Steeply upward sloping is sometimes an indication that things are going to get better in the future, that maybe there's a recession right now, but in the future things are going to pick up. There's going to be more demand for money, and interest rates, long-term interest rates in particular, are going to go up. Flat or inverted is bad. That says, hey, we think interest rates are super high now. We think the economy is going to stall. There's not going to be much demand for money. So therefore, temporarily, and usually only a short period of time, short-term interest rates are actually higher than long-term interest rates. Now, let's look at the present value of cash flows with different maturities. What if we do have a term structure and the interest rate is different in each time period? We've got a cash flow stream. The C's are all the cash flows, and the R's are all the interest rates. And again, different interest rates for each period of time.